A good friend of mine who used to live in town, he ran a martial arts studio. He has since moved out of state, but we still keep in touch. He had a question about the lunge. Specifically, he asks, trainer question for you. When you're performing a forward lunge, if you keep your leading foot closer to the back knee, is that more quad heavy? And if you're trying to activate the glute, are you driving up through the heel? I actually spelled glute glue, but I know what he meant. So let's break this down. First of all, the lunge, if done the way it's supposed to be done, is a knee dominant movement. It is a single leg knee dominant movement, and it is meant to focus on the quad. Now, depending on how you shift your weight, how you position your body, many different variables, it can shift the focus. But technically, the way that we use it in our training program, it is meant to be a quad dominant, knee dominant movement. So I'll break down the specifics of that technique, and then I'll kind of get into his question. So the way that I like to set up a lunge for a lot of my clients is simply taking a knee. A kneeling position will allow you to have a good starting point in hopefully a safe manner, depending on your mechanics and maybe underlying injuries to take into consideration. But typically this is a good place to start. From this position here, I'm looking for a couple things. This knee under this hip under this shoulder. My toe and my knee on the other leg in the front should be straight ahead and in line with the hip. So you got 3 joints on this side, all in line, facing forward. A lot of people that I have trained tend to have some kind of asymmetry or weakness that will position their toe in an opposite direction of their knee. We call that being off axis. Nonetheless, we can correct and strengthen that, but this is where you start. As I mentioned, this is a knee dominant movement, meaning that the focus is going to be on this part of my body. The quad is right above the knee. The knee should have good flexion. I like to get my heel as close to the back leg as I comfortably can without losing position. Now, the closer you get that heel to that back leg, the more engagement you're gonna need here to go through this movement. I like to have people put their hands on the hips here, chest nice and tall, pushing through this front leg so that my quad engages, coming to a standing position to meet my opposite leg right next to that engaged foot. Again, I'm only focusing on that one side. I'm going to come back down to that position, making sure that that knee, hip, and shoulder stay stacked. Okay, this is your strongest position. If you're doing a variation that is loaded with dumbbells, you have them here, and for some reason you fatigue to the point where you can't come back up, and you just kind of stay put here. This is a strong enough position to where it shouldn't bother you too much, right? The joints are stacked and you're nice and tall here, so you should be able to carry that load, versus if it was out of position like this and it was straining that hip here. Some people can handle it. Sometimes it's a good stretch too, but I find that people don't find comfort with that. Going back to what we were talking about. This knee, under this hip, under this shoulder, these joints right here on the opposite side should be in line. To my friend's question, when you're performing a forward lunge, if you keep your leading foot closer to the back knee, is that more quad heavy? So if I keep this closer to this back leg, is it more quad heavy? Based on everything that I had just described, yes. The deeper the flexion here, the more quad you're going to engage. And if you're trying to activate the glute, are you driving up through the heel? You're technically driving through the entirety of the foot, but you want a good even distribution of weight throughout that foot. If you go too heavy in the heel, you won't be able to engage the quad as smoothly and as effectively. It just won't feel right. If you are somebody who has ankle tightness, getting into this position here may be difficult. You may end up having to come out here a little bit, in which case it changes the focus a little bit. You have the ability to drive through that heel a little bit more, but now you're a little out of position. So if I want to drive through this heel, I might be able to drive through the leg and still stay in the quad, but I find that most people struggle with it. Typically when people have weak quads, bad ankle flexion and extension, they tend to have knee issues. Because the quad isn't used to being engaged, you'll end up with some biting pain here, maybe in other areas. It can manifest in a lot of different ways. It just really depends on what your experience has been, what kind of physical activity you've done without the quad being engaged. I find that people who maybe run a lot, jump a lot, but don't necessarily get into this deep flexion will have some issues like that, but it varies. So again, to answer his question, yes, the deeper the flexion of the ankle and the knee will give you more quad focus. If you want more glute focus, you can extend that leg and you can push through that heel a little bit more. I would probably use like a box, put my foot up on top of a box and drive through the heel there, putting the focus on the glute. There are other exercises for the backside, Romanian deadlifts, bridges, things like that. The posterior chain has a lot to do with your hip hinging, and that's a hip dominant movement. So again, knee dominant, hip dominant. Hip dominant tends to get the backside of the body a little bit more, hamstrings, glutes, calves. Quad dominant tends to be a little bit more on the front of the legs. And you want both, you want balance. Most people are stronger in one versus the other, and that's where a lot of people end up with some kind of pain or asymmetry that gives them discomfort. But hopefully that answers the question. I hope it wasn't too long-winded. I hope you guys can hear in here. We're running the AC and it's pretty loud in here, so hopefully my mic picked everything up pretty clearly. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys later.